Lakeside Little Theatre is pleased to present a conversation with Roger Larson. Renowned for his chameleon-like performances, Roger has been in a wide variety of theatrical productions in a career that has spanned over 6 decades, including playing the 97-year-old grandfather in Night of the Iguana, Henry Albertson in The Fantastics, Frank Foster in How the Other Half Loves, and Dr. Spivey in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Early in his career, he was part of a children's theater company, and he starred in a wild San Francisco classic cult film. After all that, Roger barely managed to survive a disastrous attempt to move to Central America and eventually settled here in Ajijic. Today's guest is Roger Larson, known to Lakeside audiences for brilliant performances in plays like Night of the Iguana and How the Other Half Loves. But Roger had quite a fascinating career before he came to Ajijic. Roger, first of all, thank you for joining us today. Your theatrical career is fascinating for a number of reasons, because it's fascinating in itself, but especially interesting to me because it looks like we may have crossed paths in San Francisco where you worked. So I get to hear behind-the-scenes stories of places I know and people I know. One of the performances I may have seen you in was The Fantastics, a musical that didn't do too well on Broadway, but was a smash hit in the West Coast, with you in it, of course. Now, you stayed with The Fantastics for 7 years, but along the way, you got to know a sweet Petaluma farm girl named Carol Doda. And for those of you in the audience who may not know who Carol Doda is, she pioneered topless dancing, which she started at a club called the Condor in San Francisco in its notorious red light district called North Beach. Now, I understand that you got to know her as a local in North Beach, where the Fantastics had an office and everybody hung out together, including you and Carol Doda. But you were also in a movie with her.
Well, yes, well, the movie was called The Rise and Fall of the Entire World, as seen from a sexual position. Now, this was quite a bit before pornography was in vogue. I mean, this was strictly titillating, not pornography. But we were doing takeoffs on different movies, and we were doing The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone.
I understand that the final scene was pretty wild, that you ended up on the back of a Hells Angels motorcycle.
Well, that's right. This was done in a huge warehouse, and it was a party, and it's hard to describe, but there was an Empire State Building with King Kong climbing the building, and the Tubes, who were a big local band at the time, were playing in one corner, and we had gotten one of the groups of Hells Angels to participate. I was dressed at this time as Carol Doda's mother, and I had to ride in on the back of a Harley with a Hells Angel. The director pointed to this Hells Angel and said, "This is going to be your partner for the evening." Well, the Hells Angel took it seriously, and he said, "No one will bother you all evening. You know, I'll make sure that no one touches you." And I got on the back and rode in on the motorcycle, and we danced all night, and that was the climax of the film.
Did he ever ask you out afterwards?
No, but he stuck with me all evening long. I couldn't get rid of him.
You got a call inviting you to join a traveling children's theater that went all over the Western United States. That must have been quite an adventure. Can you tell us about that?
It was, and it was one of the highlights of my young life. I had just finished 2 years of college, and in my little town that I grew up in, when I got the chance to audition for a children's theater group out of Sacramento, but it was a little different. They didn't want you to audition individually. They wanted you to audition as an entire cast. So with some friends of mine that I knew from college, we got together and we decided to audition. The reason she was doing this was that you're going to spend 9 months with this same group of people, and you better all get along. So we auditioned, and lo and behold, we got the part. So we started rehearsals, and when we finished, we got in our little yellow Ford station wagon with a yellow trailer behind it that was fitted with everything that we needed to put on our production. Everything fit in exactly the same way. You couldn't put it together any other way. That's the way the trailer was. We could set the entire set up in 20 minutes. And that means backdrops, costumes, lights, makeup. We took off for Havre, Montana, and it took us maybe 3 days to get there. And I have to say also, this was in 1959 or 1960. There was no interstate highway system at the time. It was just being built. So every place we went, there was construction going on. You sometimes had to take a dirt road or a country road from one highway to another. So we arrived in Havre, Montana, and did our first show. And the way it would operate, we got an itinerary for the next week. So we knew we were playing Havre, Montana today. Tonight we'd probably be playing in another town. Tomorrow we'd be playing in another town. And then maybe we'd have to double back and play another town. But we had the itinerary for the whole week. We zigzagged back and forth from Washington, Oregon, Utah, all the way to back. By December, we made it back to Sacramento, had a week off, and then we took off for Texas, and we zigzagged our way back and ended up in June in Sacramento. The interesting part was playing these small towns where then, there was television, but it was still kind of new, and there was no computers. People didn't have a lot of entertainment. It was a very interesting experience.
Now, Roger, you were also in the San Francisco production of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but I understand that getting cast in that production was a several-year-long process. You want to tell us that story?
When I was doing when I first started doing the Fantastics, a friend of mine asked for comps to the show, and she said she was going to bring her boyfriend. So after the show, I said, I'll go have drinks with you, and we had a lovely time talking, and her boyfriend was a business major at UC Berkeley, but he seemed to know a lot about theater. And we talked more and more, and I discovered that he really didn't want to be a CPA. He wanted to be a director, but his father owned one of the largest accounting firms in San Francisco, and he was being groomed to take it over. Well, me being the champion of theater I just told him, well, you can't do that. You have to follow your dream. You have to do what you want to do. Probably 10 years later, I had done the Fantastics. I had left San Francisco for a short while, came back, and looking for I needed a job, so I'm looking for any part that was available, and there was nothing that I could find. And one day, the production manager of the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest came over and said, there's a role becoming vacant because the actor just got a role in a touring company, and the director would like you to come down and audition for it. I thought it was kind of odd, but I'll take anything. So I went down and I auditioned, and I couldn't see the director. He was sitting out in the audience, and after the audition, I walked out there, and he looked familiar to me. And he said, "You don't know who I am, do you?" He said, "No." He said, "Well, do you remember when we came to see the Fantastics and I was in school in Berkeley? The next day after I had drinks with you, I went to Berkeley. I quit. I went directly down to Los Angeles, went to University of California, LA, and joined their director's program, went through it. I now am director of the Marin Little Theatre Company, and he was the one who had gotten One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest off the ground. And he said, I always said that if a part became available, you're going to play it because you're the one who got me started in theater. So that's how I got the part in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Well, at some point, I understand you decided to leave San Francisco, and you thought you were going to move to Belize and buy a house. What happened?
Well, we were there for 4 weeks. We thought that would be enough time to find a place to buy. And we were having a hard time. We finally decided we would rent a place until we found something because there was nothing available. So it was the night before we had to fly back. And we had made a decision on a place to rent, and we were going to fly back, get our dogs and the rest of our stuff, come back, and that was going to be our home. Well, we went back to the hotel, and the staff was on a computer, this was in 2001, so computers were kind of primitive at the time, but they were looking at the weather. And they said, well, there's a hurricane coming, but it's not going to hit here. There hasn't been a hurricane for 40 years. So we went to bed thinking we'll get up tomorrow and go to the main city and fly home. Well, 6 o'clock in the morning, bang, 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 bang on the door. The hurricane is heading right for us. So we get into a van. They start driving us to higher ground, and we get about 20 miles out of town, and we get a flat tire. And we don't have a spare, and we don't have a jack. So the driver stops people who are going by, finally finds someone with a jack, jacks the car up, takes the tire off, and he says, I'll see you in an hour or two. I'll just roll back to the next town, get it fixed, and I'll be back. Well, there we are, just the two of us, sitting in a van. The dark clouds are starting to come over, and it's getting windier and windier, and we don't know if he's coming back or if he's not. And eventually he does, and he puts the tire back on. We get in the car. We go maybe about an hour more, starting uphill, and the car overheats, and we have no water. Well, we had a couple of bottles of water, and we gave those to him, and he put that in the car, but that wasn't enough. So he said, well, I think there's a stream down there somewhere. I'll take the bottles I have, I'll go get some water, and I'll be back. And he's gone for maybe 45 minutes, and it's getting darker and darker and darker. And eventually he comes back and puts the water in, and we take off. And we eventually make it to the hotel that we were being driven to, up on the veranda, just as the hurricane hit. We got in our room, sat all night listening to shortwave radio to see what was going on, because it was directly hitting the town that we were just going to live in. And by the next morning, everyone came into the dining room, and there were people looking sad and devastated in some cases. And we found out that the town that we were going to live in had one building left standing. So we got a cab and had to drive about an hour to the main city to get on our plane. We took off in the last plane that was leaving Belize, and that's how we didn't end up in Belize.
So you ended up in Thailand instead.
We ended up in Thailand.
And you were there for a number of years.
7 years.
Roger, of all of the productions you've been in the college productions that you starred in the traveling theater, in the Fantastics, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, in a movie with a topless dancer, what was the favorite production that you acted in throughout your entire career?
The Night of the Iguana. It's a very small role. It's the role of the poet who's 90 some years old and is about ready to die, and he's trying to finish his last poem. And I was in a wonderful production of that with a wonderful director who let me explore it in ways I never dreamed I could do. And the poem came alive for me. It's become part of who I am. And I still quote that poem a lot to myself. It has a lot of meaning for me. And so I have to say that production of Night of the Iguana is probably my favorite.
Can you remember the poem?
I do. How calmly does the orange branch observe the sky begin to blanch without a cry, without a prayer, with no betrayal of despair. Sometime while night obscures the tree, the zenith of its life will be gone, past forever. And from thence a second history will commence, a chronicle no longer gold, a bargaining with mist and mold, and finally the broken stem, the plummeting to earth, and then an intercourse not well designed for beings of a golden kind, whose native green must arch above the earth's obscene, corrupting love. And still the ripe fruit and the branch observe the sky begin to blanch without a cry, without a prayer, with no betrayal of despair. O courage, could you not as well select a second place to dwell? Not only in that golden tree, but in the frightened heart of me.
Thank you for spending the time with us.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.